But I've talked about mental health and drugs a lot. And although I've came on the podcast and said things that when it comes to our society, we may be over medicated, I've come under a different perspective in the conversation that makes things a lot more interesting. So we know that people inherently should be allowed the ability to let their brains flourish and let their experience kind of determine who they are, right? But I've come to realize that there's another part of this conversation. Naturally, I don't think people should just rely on drugs to kind of put them in the status quo mentally or physically if there's nothing wrong with you, right? Because I do think those things kind of do something to your body to make your body unnatural based off circumstance. So I'm not a big fan of the medication of people and being over medicalized in general in American and Western society, especially to kids. There shouldn't be a need to constantly give kids drugs in order to put them on the right path. There needs to be some type of kind of nurturing to see if there's a better solution first. So that's where I want to start off with. That's what I truly believe in terms of, what we have, in terms of what society is. But at the same time, I think there's an interesting part of this conversation. And that interesting part is that the people who are unnatural. And another part of that conversation is what is society turning people into in general? So there's a two-parter for this question. First, let's talk about the people who are unnatural. So individuals that do a profession, that do a career that require beyond human scope abilities probably have a strong case for doing things that is not natural to ensure their performance is up to par. A perfect example would be a professional athlete. Now, obviously, being a professional athlete is something that's purely entertainment based. It's not needed for society, but it is a part of society. People want to be athletes. Sports is fun, and sports can make you a lot of money. So getting rid of it is nonsense. It's a part of who we are in today's society and moving forward. So there is an actual need to be an athlete for people. A want to be an athlete for people. And when you're an athlete, you are going through a trial with certain sports, whether it's boxing, MMA, NFL, soccer, baseball, maybe even golf and tennis. But we know a lot of these sports require a certain level of athletic ability that is beyond the scope of humanity. And what I mean by that is naturally, if we put a human in the wild to hunt and gather, they're going to be obviously more athletic than the average human. Natural humans will be much more, have better cardio, probably be stronger in general, be faster in general. They'll be like an animal. So naturally, they'll be much more capable. But when I'm looking at professional athletes, I think there's a legitimate argument, there's a legitimate claim to be made that professional athletes are more physically imposing than a natural human being in the wild. Their muscles are fine tuned. Their speed are fine tuned. Their cardio are fine tuned. Reflexes, agility, all of everything that makes up a human body are fine tuned to be the best of the best at your sport. LeBron James, a perfect example. I doubt any human in the wild will be nearly as athletically as imposing as a LeBron James, as a Miles Garrett, right? These people are athletic demons. So the reason why I bring them up is they don't get there naturally. Obviously, it takes a very strict curriculum of diet. You have to eat a very certain way. A very disciplined workout schedule, of course. But there's another function. They have to take other materials that is beyond the natural scope to achieve such performance. Pre-workout, protein. I'm sure there's other pills that I don't even know about that these people can take to maximize their performance. So I was thinking of this, and this is a perfect example of a person that is on the irregular path of humanity, so to speak, based off what they do, which would be a legitimate reason on why they would take drugs to kind of put them on put them on a side of performance to maximize what they're doing. Now, the long term effects could be very detrimental. We got, a lot of athletes have, very detrimental things happen to their body. I mean, Deion Sanders have talked about it that he has a very bad leg and it hurts constantly. We have people getting it CTE. We have people being able to kind of, walk without hurting constantly. So there's really something to be said that they will never have a normal life in general. But in order to stay there on their path to success, they require these extra material, basically. So that's one example. I mean, we can even go outside the example of sports where it's a very irregular path for a human, but even like something that is more mentally taxing, where it's all up here. We understand there are people who are extremely intelligent that is working on material of substance that requires a level of thinking that maybe, let's say, 18 hours of the day needs you at your best. Scholars, certain scientists, certain lawmakers. So there is a reasonable claim to be made that even these people may need certain drugs to keep them awake, to keep their brain functioning, to keep their mind focused. So we recognize that there are natural profession, unnatural career paths that may require you to go outside the norm of your human capability to adhere to those functions. So there's a second part of it, and that is the change in society for people nowadays. What do I mean by that? Well, we know that current society in general is nowhere close to how humans should be, or humans were naturally supposed to be living their lives. Right? We don't really, in normal Western society, we don't really have the hunters and gatherers. We don't really have these people that is constantly needing to survive every day of the moment. For the most part in Western society, you got people on their phones, on TikTok, on YouTube, on a daily basis, going to school, going to work, going home, having a full stomach, all of that, having shower, having water. So these people are living normal lives, but this current life is so different from the natural life that we keep on speaking of. But with the addition of certain things in society, could it be argued that it's affecting the human mentality to an extreme extent to the point where it's impossible for us, for our brains, for our being to be natural? There may be a certain level of evolution and adaptation that could kind of debunk this, but I'm just trying to engage in this conversation for a second. With the increased amount of people that are having ADHD, having ADD, of course, with the increased amount of people, and I'm really focusing on a very particular way of being right now, being on social media constantly, being on electronics constantly, having these, flashing images, having these, receptors constantly bouncing back and forth in your brain, being able to, or being placed in these potentially harmful ideological echo chambers, being like pushed information in your brain constantly without being able to conceptualize the information throughout your life, is these affecting the human brains to the extent where it's impossible to stay still, right? So I'm going to use myself for an example. I am, as you guys can tell, I'm a pretty smart individual, and I'm pretty smart for my age. Uh, I'm like in my mid 20s, right? Nowadays. So, with that said, with how intelligent I am, I would say that it's not always the easiest to focus on certain things, right? When I'm in a class or when I'm in a lecture and people are just rambling on something that I don't deem interesting, I can't pay attention. I will fall asleep every single time. That has been an issue for me since high school, middle school. Even in the military, when someone was telling me stuff and it was boring, I started falling asleep. I factually can't stay up. I struggle staying up. My brain struggles to stay active. Okay. When I'm doing research on something, I legit have to keep my brain busy so I can engage. Like, it takes me a while to engage in the stuff I'm researching so I can really focus on the material itself. So sometimes I struggle kind of just like reading a full article without getting bored out of my mind. Sometimes I need like my Xbox on playing video games, or I need another video kind of occupying my brain so I can kind of focus. It's weird. And the reason why I bring myself up is I'm thinking like maybe if I took certain drugs, legal drugs, that would help refocus my brain so I can pay attention better, so I can stay laser focused on the material better. And that's why I think the conversation is interesting. Not that I'm tempted to do it, but at the very least, why the conversation is more nuanced than just saying that the world is over medicated, which it is. If we're realizing that technology is changing the ways our brains function, if we're realizing that social media is changing the ways our brains function, that our brain is functioning much more, it's much more capable to an extent where it's able to handle more and more information and process things much faster. But with that said, it's not able to focus singularly on things as well as it has before. And maybe these outside drugs can kind of either put us on the status quo or adapt us to this new way of life. There could be a solution out there that we can change the standard of living to better represent our way of our mental health to current society. There might be a legitimate discussion behind that, but it's just very interesting, with that being said, on how humans are evolving, and if in order for us to be our best versions of ourselves, maybe that pill will help us. So my question to you people who are listening to the podcast is, let's say you have a child who is not dumb by any means, pretty smart, smarter than maybe even the average kid, but they suck at focusing on homework. They suck at doing homework. They suck at staying focused in class. If they could stay focused and they could do their homework, they would ace it all the time. But they just legit can't focus on these things. So let's say this person exists, your child exists, and you know that a certain pill will make them focus better, that they'll be able to focus on what they're learning in class, they'll stay up in class, and they'll do their homework and get straight A's, go to education scholarship to whatever college. Let's say if you have this option of an individual, would you or would you not consider giving them that pill? Initially, I always thought that people were too willing to medicate their kids. And I still think that is the case, because it's so hard. That's why I'm saying these conversations are so nuanced. It's so hard because we realize as a society that if we want our kids to be the best versions of themselves and we have a ability to make them better, then a pill would be the obvious answer. At the same time, people are not responsible enough to ensure that this is a last ditch effort. And that's where the problems lies. We have a solution. Too much of it is problematic. Always the give and take that is so hard to determine. But the answer is out there. Maybe we should have a better vetting process in the Medicare industry. Maybe we shouldn't advertise the need for these drugs to people constantly. But it's capitalism. They're not going to go away. So podcasts like mine have to offer a certain level of nuance behind it. For me, where I'm going to lean in this conversation is that there are certain scenarios where medication is the best solution. If you're living an irregular life as an athlete, if you're living a regular life as a scholar, medication may be required for you to maximize your performance. And honestly, I'm okay with that. But talking about the newer generation of individuals that are becoming much more hyperactive in terms of their brain, I would say that your first instinct is looking at the way of life and whether or not that is conducive to how they are being. Are you allowing your kids to be on their tablet 24/7 and play video games 24/7? Are you giving them the ability to consume information on a focused manner, like reading a book? Are you having engaging conversations with your child? Are you allowing them to experience the world itself? After going through these lines of questioning and looking at your way of life and even determining whether or not it's plausible to adhere to these ways of life should always be the first step. But if the first step is not enough, there is a legitimate way or legitimate reason that certain medication can help your kid put themselves on the status quo. Now, does this play the same when it comes to depression? Because the drugs I'm talking about is putting people on the status quo to maximize their efficiency in life. Well, when it comes to stuff like depression, right, and these mental health issues, these are circumstances that's leading to a negative state of mind. And there's really not a strong case that certain medication will fix this state of mind. A lot of this stuff, when it comes to a compromised state of mind, from what I've seen, tends to be very much internalized, based off trauma, based off your community, based off a dissociation versus who you are now versus who you want to be. And the first answer for me should never be, let's have the doctors fix me. In order for me to find the answers they need to kind of put them on the right track, in order for that to take place, they have to find out what is wrong with them. Obviously, it can be therapy or some type of self-reflection on, okay, what is my issue, and then going to therapy. I don't recommend self-diagnostic, but I will recommend trying to understand yourself a little bit more before you get actual help. I don't think there's anything wrong with that in particular. Self-diagnostic, I'm not a fan of. And then obviously answering that question on how will I come to terms with the problems I'm having internally. I've had plenty of conversations in reference to, these different mental illnesses that may go on, whether it's gender dysphoria, body dysphoria, depression, so on and so on. And a lot of these things are dependent on external factors, not internal ones. So once you are able to diagnose what those things are, once you are able to find a means of kind of coming to terms with the situation or finding a better situation, I think those should always be the first first option. I think that is always should be the first option. And I guess the biggest question or the biggest conversation point before we start wrapping things up is, what about kids? Now, I talked about performance and other kids should be involved. I think kids ultimately need to grow up to be who they are. Even when I bring up the drug situation to kind of maximize their performance, or, based on society, put them on the status quo, I ultimately think that the adaptation of a kid to society is still the best course of action to make them who they will be. Let them grow up, let them become an adult, and then after that experience, after that perspective, after that responsibility, let them decide on who they want to be. And that is my conclusion on how to handle kids, basically. So that is all we got today for today's podcast episode. Feel free to let me know what you guys think in the comment section, or you can leave a 5-star review on Apple Podcast or Spotify. If you want to contact me via email, you want to be on a guest in the future, or if you want to kind of spread the message, you can do all of that via my website, www.purplepoliticalbreakdown.com. This podcast is here for a reason. We are here to have a nuanced conversation to make sure that we are finding solutions versus finding problems, and we're pushing the conversation forward. So push this podcast forward while you're at it, of course. And if you want to join the Patreon, that is on the website as well. I do hope you guys enjoyed. You can watch us on Roku.tv. You can watch us on YouTube. You can come to the live streams on Mondays and Thursdays, 8 p.m. EST. You all have a good one. Take care. If you want to watch the full episode of this podcast, make sure you go on Roku TV and watch it on the Planet X network, where you can watch the full video version for the podcast. Again, go to Planet X Network on Roku.tv to watch the full version. I hope you do enjoy. Of course, you can still listen to the full audio version on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and any other podcast platform you listen to podcasts.